Welcome to today's training. This is part two of our Introduction to Work series, and it is on key laws that support youth and career readiness. I'll be asking you to complete a little evaluation survey for me at the end just to give me some feedback. Hopefully, it'll help me to improve these trainings, which is what I'm always striving to do. I'll put the link to that survey in the chat box toward the end. Also, I will be sending you this PowerPoint, so don't fret. You will be receiving it by email probably later this afternoon. So don't feel like you need to write down everything that you see on the slides. My name is Sharon Blackman. I'm the Director of Training at Families Helping Families of Greater New Orleans. Our center is one of 10 nonprofit family resource centers in the FHF network. We are all across Louisiana. Wherever you live in the state, there is a Families Helping Families center that serves your parish. Our center is located in Jefferson Parish, and we provide over 100 of these kinds of training opportunities every year. So be sure to kind of check in on our website every once in a while and see what we have coming up because we have some really good ones. Even this month, we have some excellent ones. There, we've started a Tuesday evening training series, I guess you could say. They're not necessarily related, but it's just on Tuesday evenings. Tonight at 7, I will be doing IEPs and behaviors and discipline. Oh my. And that's at 7 p.m. tonight. On, in, what is it? No, it's next week on the 7th, on Tuesday evening. I have a couple of guests from Lassard. Melinda Luna and Tracy O'Donnell will be with me, and their session is called Shining Light on ASD and essential supports. So you'll definitely not want to miss that one if you know or love someone with autism. It'll be a great resource-filled hour. This training project was originally funded through a grant from the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services. That's called OSERS. OSERS is our acronym for that. Also, Rehabilitation Services Administration, the RSA, and it's a project of the Alabama Parent Education Center. The RSA Parent Center region that compiled this project includes our center, Families Helping Families of Greater New Orleans, is the Parent Training and Information Center for Louisiana. It also includes the PTIs in Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. So I hope that you're enjoying this series. I'd like to get to know kind of who you are before we get started. So in the chat box, tell us about the hat that you wear or the hats that you wear. Are you a parent or a caregiver of an adult or a child with an intellectual disability or another kind of disability, developmental disability? Are you a professional? Are you an educator or a direct service worker? Do you work for another agency like one of our state agencies? Tell me what hats you wear. Okay, we have a parent of a 14-year-old teen with autism spectrum disorder, parent and professional. We all kind of wear more than one hat if you really think about it. Program monitor for OCDD. Thank you so much for being here. We love to have parents and we love to have professionals. So everyone brings a little something different to the table. And we hope that no matter what your background is or where you're coming from today, that you will take away some things that you can use either with the families you serve or with your own family. Educator, thank you so much for being here, Dr. Gale. Parents, another parent of a teen with autism. This series is going to be great for you to get some real practical, practical things to know and do with a teen with a developmental disability. Another parent of a teen with autism. Beauregard ARC. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I certainly appreciate your attendance. Magnolia Community Services here in our area. Very good, very good. So let's get started on what we're going to be doing today. As I already mentioned, this training discusses the key laws that support youth and career readiness. So in this part of our four-part series, we're going to talk about the laws that you see there on your screen. The Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, which we talk about a lot, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which is where we get our Section 504 from, Career and Technical Education Act for the 21st Century, that's the Perkins 5 for short, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, and then the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. I'm going to try not to let the acronyms fly too fast. Hopefully, if I use acronyms, you're at least going to have it at the top of your screen. Sometimes it does get old saying the full name of these over and over, so I'll try to be gentle, though, with the acronyms. But before we go too far, we're going to talk about the acronyms. So Every Student Succeeds Act, I just told you, is ESSA. And then IDEA is the one that we talk about all the time with IEPs and educational issues for school age students with disabilities. IEP, of course, is the Individualized Education Program. That's the document that directs all of the students' special education and related services. FAPE is Free Appropriate Public Education, and that's one of the cornerstones of the federal special education law. LRE is the other cornerstone, least restrictive environment, and that's the place where your child should be receiving their education. WIOA, the WIOA, WIOA is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. CTE is Career and Technical Education Programs. Pre-ETS refers to pre-employment transition services. And then VR is vocational rehabilitation. Louisiana's VR is provided by LRS, which I should have also put on the screen, and don't guess I did. That's Louisiana Rehabilitation Services. So let's start with ESSA. The Every Student Succeeds Act is a federal law that was enacted in 2015 to govern education policy in the United States. ESSA includes several provisions that are specifically aimed at improving educational outcomes for students with disabilities. And remember, I'm going to send you this PowerPoint, so don't feel like you need to be jotting everything down, okay? You'll get this later. One of the most significant provisions in ESSA related to students with disabilities is the requirement that states develop and implement statewide accountability systems that include all students, including those with disabilities. And this means that states have to assess the academic achievement of students with disabilities and include the results of those assessments in their accountability system. So they can't make up these big, great numbers and not include the numbers from the students who have disabilities. So under ESSA, states are also required to set goals for the academic achievement of students with disabilities and to include strategies for improving their academic performance in their state plans. In addition, ESSA requires states to provide professional development for educators on how to effectively teach students with disabilities and to use evidence-based interventions to improve their academic outcomes. And I hope that those evidence-based interventions that the students need are funded by the school districts. That would be ideal. ESSA also includes provisions related to the use of assistive technology for students with disabilities. States are required to ensure that students with disabilities have access to appropriate assistive technology, or AT, devices and services, and to provide professional development for educators on how to use assistive technology effectively. And then finally, ESSA includes provisions related to the inclusion of students with disabilities in state and district assessments. States have to provide accommodations and modifications for students with disabilities to ensure that they can participate, like in the standardized test, state tests. And they have to report the results of those tests separately for students with disabilities. So they have to be included. And I know we all feel differently about those state mandated tests and everything, but The fact that they include our students is actually a good thing because it provides some accountability for schools to have to educate our children. So that is a good thing, even though the tests absolutely, I know, drive all of us crazy. That goes without saying. So to recap, ESSA includes several provisions aimed at improving educational outcomes for students with disabilities. These provisions require states to assess the academic achievement of students with disabilities, to set goals for their academic performance, to provide professional development for the educators, to ensure access to assistive technology or AT, and to include students with disabilities in state and district assessments. So that's kind of ESSA in a nutshell. Now let's look at IDEA. And of course, we do look at this one quite a lot because just about all of our monthly webinars are somehow related to IDEA. So it's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004, and it's a federal law that governs the education of students with disabilities in the country. It was first enacted in 1975 under a different name and has been amended several times, with the most recent amendments in 2004. IDEA provides a framework for the education of students with disabilities, including their identification, their evaluation, and eligibility for special education and related services. The law requires that students with disabilities receive a free appropriate public education, or FAPE, in the least restrictive environment, or LRE. And those two things, FAPE and LRE, are the cornerstones of IDEA. But this means that students with disabilities should be educated in regular classrooms with non-disabled peers, if at all possible, and they should only be placed in more restrictive settings when it's absolutely necessary. And side note, absolutely necessary for the student and not because of administrative issues. Okay, so that's just another little tidbit there. IDEA also requires that the IEPs, or individualized education programs, be developed for each student with a disability. And the IEP, of course, is a written document. It outlines the student's educational goals, the special education services they'll receive, the related services, all of that is in the IEP. It's developed by a team that includes the students' caregivers or parents, their teachers, and other school personnel that provide services to them. In addition, IDEA requires that parents be provided with procedural safeguards, which is their rights, and it outlines their rights and the rights of their child who has the disability. It includes their right to participate in their IEP, the right to obtain an independent educational evaluation if needed, and the right to request mediation or due process if there are disputes with the school district that they can't resolve. And then finally, IDEA includes provisions related to the education of students with disabilities in private schools and the transition of students with disabilities from school to post-secondary education or employment. Overall, IDEA is a comprehensive law that ensures that students with disabilities receive FAPE in the least restrictive environment, or LRE, and that their educational needs are met through the development of individualized education programs and procedural safeguards for parents. Now, since this webinar is about employment, let's look a little more closely at the transition provisions of IDEA. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004 includes transition provisions aimed at ensuring that students with disabilities receive the necessary supports and services to transition from high school to either post-secondary education or employment. One key provision requires that students with disabilities begin receiving transition services by age 16. That's like the latest, okay? Earlier, if it's deemed appropriate by the IEP team. But these services are designed to help students with disabilities prepare for life after high school. And that includes post-secondary education, if that's their desire, vocational training, if that's what they want to do, or employment. Some students, of course, will go directly from high school into a job. But transition services can include instruction, related services, community experiences, and development of employment and other post-high school adult living objectives. So a lot of stuff is wrapped up in transition planning and transition services for teen students with disabilities. IDEA also requires that students with disabilities have a coordinated set of transition activities and services included in their IEP. This coordinated set of activities and services should be based on the student's needs, their strengths, their interests, their preferences, and it should take into account their post-secondary goals. So what it is they want to do after high school. Very important to get our kids' input and not to, plan their lives for them. But the law also requires that schools provide students with disabilities and their families with information about community resources and agencies that can assist with the transition to post-secondary education or employment. And then finally, IDEA includes provisions related to the transfer of rights from parents to students with disabilities when they reach the age of majority, which in Louisiana is 18. And this means that students with disabilities become responsible for making decisions about their own education and transition services unless they have been deemed incompetent under state law. We have several options regarding the transfer of rights for students in Louisiana. That includes supported decision making and continuing tutorship, which are two much less inhibitive options. And please don't wait until your child's 18th birthday before you start looking at these things. You need to start looking at that, plan ahead. We've got a couple parents here today who have 17-year-olds. Now is the time to get things in place and to decide how you're going to manage that transition, because at 18, on their 18th birthday, they're considered a competent major, and so they have the right to make their own decisions and everything. So if you need some supports in place before they turn 18, now is the time to do that. So overall, the transition provisions within IDEA are designed to ensure that students with disabilities receive the necessary support and services to successfully transition from high school to post-secondary education or employment, and that they are involved in the decision-making process related to their own education and their own future goals. It's very important to make sure we know what it is they want to do. Now, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is a federal law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities and requires employers and agencies receiving federal funds to provide reasonable accommodations to individuals with disabilities. It also authorizes the state client assistance programs, or CAP, and independent living centers. Finally, the Rehabilitation Act includes provisions related to the development of vocational rehabilitation, or the VR programs for individuals with disabilities. And these programs provide a range of services to people with disabilities to help them obtain and maintain employment. And that includes things like job training, counseling, rehabilitation counseling, and job placement assistance. So there are a lot of things that are available to help train our students for work. Now, the Rehabilitation Act also gives a broader definition of disability. So, someone who has a physical or mental impairment that constitutes a substantial impediment to employment can benefit from vocational rehab services. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 defines disability as any physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And major life activities may include functions such as caring for yourself, performing manual tasks, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, working. There's a whole list there on your slide, and then that's not exhaustive. Under the Rehabilitation Act, though, a person with a disability also includes someone who has a record of an impairment or is regarded as having an impairment. And this definition is like the definition of disability used in other federal laws like the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Rehabilitation Act also includes a broader definition of disability that applies specifically to vocational rehab programs. Under this definition, a person with a disability is someone who has a physical or mental impairment that constitutes a substantial impediment to employment and who can benefit from vocational rehabilitation services in terms of an employment outcome. And this definition is more focused on the individual's ability to work and to obtain employment, and it's used to determine eligibility for vocational rehabilitation services. Because obviously, just anyone can't walk in and get VR services. They have to qualify, have to be eligible for that. So overall, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 defines disability as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities and includes both an individualized and a broader definition depending on the context of the program or service that's being provided. The Rehabilitation Act is divided into several sections and each has its own focus. I've put these on this slide because 504 is in there as well. I just wanted you to see that there, oh, I see that my one got displaced somehow. Sorry about that. I'll fix it before I send out your PowerPoint today. But Section 501 requires federal agencies to take affirmative action to employ and advance individuals with disabilities. Section 503 requires federal contractors and subcontractors to take affirmative action to employ and advance individuals with disabilities as well. 504 of the Rehabilitation Act prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities by recipients of federal financial assistance. And this includes schools, colleges, universities, anyone who receives federal funds. Section 504 requires these entities to provide reasonable accommodations to people with disabilities, which may include modifications to policies, modifications to their practices and their procedures. If you have a child who has a 504 plan in school, this section is where that plan came from. Another important section of the Rehabilitation Act is 508, which requires federal agencies to ensure that their electronic and information technology is accessible to individuals with disabilities. So that includes their websites, their software, and any other electronic information resources. Overall, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is a comprehensive law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities, and it requires employers and agencies receiving federal funds to provide reasonable accommodations to individuals with disabilities. The law also includes provisions related to accessibility of electronic and information technology and the development of vocational rehab programs for individuals with disabilities. So it's a pretty big law. The Strengthening Career and Technical Education Act for the 21st Century is shortened to the Perkins 5. It was formerly called the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act, so that's where the Perkins came from. It's a federal law that provides funding and support for career and technical education programs or CTE programs in schools and colleges across the U.S. The law was reauthorized in 2018 to update and strengthen CTE programs and increase their effectiveness in preparing students for high skill, high wage, and in demand careers. One of the key features of the Perkins 5 is its focus on equity and access for all students, including those with disabilities. The law requires that CTE programs be accessible to students with disabilities and that they provide accommodations and support to help these students succeed. In addition, the law emphasizes the importance of providing work-based learning opportunities like internships, apprenticeships, on-the-job training. And these can be especially valuable for students with disabilities who may face, increased barriers to employment. So to further support students with disabilities in CTE programs, Perkins 5 includes provisions to increase access to high quality career guidance and counseling services that are tailored to the unique needs and abilities of students with disabilities. It includes provisions to encourage collaboration between schools and colleges and local workforce development boards to ensure that CTE programs align with the needs of local employers and that it provides opportunities for students with disabilities to gain meaningful work experience. Perkins 5 includes provisions to provide professional development and training for educators and other personnel to help them better support students with disabilities in the CTE programs. And Perkins 5 includes provisions to promote research and evaluation of promising practices for supporting students with disabilities in the CTE programs and to disseminate information about effective strategies to schools and colleges across the country. Don't you hate it when somebody in North Dakota comes up with this great program, that would really benefit people all over and nobody says anything about it? We need to be better about sharing information and disseminating that information to other programs that could benefit everyone. So Louisiana's career and technical education program is called Jumpstart. And I've put that link somewhere. It's on the resource page at the end of the slide deck. I see that this slide's a little bit kooky too. I'm gonna have to fix that. I'm sorry. We bounce back and forth between, we do these on Canva, and then sometimes when we translate them over to PowerPoint, which I need to do visually for my own accommodation. Sometimes they don't. I have to redo some of the graphics and stuff because they don't translate always because we have kind of an old Microsoft. Anyway, long story. Anyway, my slides get messed up sometimes is the bottom line. So I've linked that Jumpstart information on the Louisiana Department of Education website that will be on the resources page at the end of your slide deck. Overall, little recap, the Strengthening Career and Technical Education Act for the 21st Century, Perkins 5, recognizes the importance of preparing all students, including those with disabilities, for success in the modern workforce by providing funding, resources, and support to the CTE programs that prioritize equity and access. This law can help ensure that students with disabilities can get the skills, the knowledge, and the experience that they need to achieve their career goals and to contribute to their communities. Everybody wants to contribute. And it's important for our kids to be at a point where they can achieve their dreams, get to their goals, do what they really desire to do, and contribute to their community. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, is a federal law that provides funding and guidelines for workforce development programs, including those that serve individuals with disabilities. WIOA aims to increase access to education, training, and employment opportunities for all individuals, including youth with disabilities. WIOA makes key changes to the definition for youth. So there are two categories for WIOA. There is out of school youth and in school youth. Out of school youth is for ages 16 to 24, which includes those who are dropouts or graduates, those who are low income, have deficits in basic skills. Some are English language learners, or they're involved in the juvenile or adult justice system. Some are homeless in foster care, pregnant or parenting, or have a disability. So that's the category for out of school youth. That is ages 16 to 24. The in-school youth for ages 14 to 21 who are low income, have deficits in basic skills, are English language learners involved in the juvenile or adult justice system, homeless, foster care, pregnant or parenting, or have a disability, but they are considered in-school youth, and that's for ages 14 to 21. There is some overlap in ages. Under WIOA, youth with disabilities are provided with a range of services to help them achieve their education and employment goals. These services may include career counseling, job training, and apprenticeships, as well as support for transitioning from school to work. WIOA also mandates that vocational rehabilitation services be provided to youth with disabilities, including those who are transitioning out of special education programs. In addition, WIOA requires that state and local workforce development boards develop strategies to increase the participation of individuals with disabilities in workforce programs. This includes providing accommodations and supports to ensure that those kids and young adults with disabilities can fully participate in training and employment programs. Overall, WIOA represents an important effort to increase access to employment opportunities for individuals with disabilities, including youth, and to ensure that they have the skills and resources they need to succeed in the workforce. Now, pre-employment transition services, or pre-ETS. That's a key component of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA. They help youth with disabilities to prepare for employment and post-secondary education opportunities. Pre-ETS are designed to help students with disabilities explore career options, develop employability skills, and gain work-based learning experiences before they leave high school. Be sure that pre-ETS is a part of your child's transition plan in their IEP by the time they turn 16, which is the age that the schools must begin transition goals. Okay, if your child is going to turn 16 while this IEP is in place, they are supposed to have transition goals in place on that IEP. WIOA requires that each state provide pre-ETS to all students with disabilities who are eligible or potentially eligible for vocational rehabilitation services. Pre-ETS are provided in a variety of settings like schools or vocational rehab agencies or community-based organizations. On your screen are some components that pre-ETS services may include. Job exploration counseling. This involves exploring career options and the skills, education, and training required for various jobs. Work-based learning experiences. That includes internships, apprenticeships, and other on-the-job training opportunities. Counseling on post-secondary education. That includes assistance with things like applying for college or other post-secondary education and training programs. Workplace readiness training, that's soft skills training like communication, teamwork, problem solving, those kinds of skills that are not necessarily related to the actual job, but related to work in general. Instruction in self-advocacy, and this involves teaching students how to communicate their needs, and advocate for themselves in the workplace. Like if they need a particular accommodation that would be easy enough for an employer to provide, speaking up and requesting that. So overall, pre-ETs are an important part of WIOA's efforts to help youth with disabilities transition from school to work and achieve their career goals. By providing these services, WIOA aims to increase the employment rates of individuals with disabilities and promote their economic self-sufficiency. That is certainly something that we all want. We want to top off our discussion with the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. The ADA is a federal law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in various aspects of life, and that includes employment, public accommodations, transportation, telecommunications, and government services. Sorry, drew a blank. It was signed into law in 1990 and it was amended in 2008. Under the ADA, employers with 15 or more employees are required to provide reasonable accommodations to qualified individuals with disabilities if the accommodations don't cause undue hardship to the employer. Public accommodations like restaurants, stores, hotels are also required to make their facilities accessible to people with disabilities, including providing things like accessible parking, accessible entrances, and accessible restrooms. Of course, if you live in New Orleans or if you've ever been here, if you go down into the French Quarter in particular, those places were grandfathered in because there's just rarely do you find any place down there that is wheelchair accessible, which is kind of what I think of when I think of physically accessible um, businesses. I've been down there with my son, and we use a wheelchair when we take him out into the community. A lot of times, if we're going to be out for a while and walking for a while, we'll use his wheelchair, and it is difficult. Even if you can just pop a little wheelie and get into the building, with there's just a small curb going into the building, you can't navigate inside the building. I mean, restaurants, stores have things just so crammed up because the spaces, I guess, are so small. Things are so crammed together that it's really difficult to navigate. And I feel sorry for tourists who are here with strollers even. You get those double wide strollers or the real long strollers if you have a double. Man, it's just even the little umbrella strollers are difficult to navigate in those situations. But um, public places are required to make their facilities accessible um, to people with disabilities. If if it's historic buildings, they don't necessarily have to make those changes, though, unfortunately. The ADA also requires that public transportation systems provide accessible services and that telecommunication companies offer services that are accessible to people with hearing or speech disabilities. The law prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in state and local government services, including voting, and that requires that government buildings and programs be accessible. The ADA has been instrumental in improving access and opportunities for people with disabilities in many areas of life, but there's still work to be done to ensure full inclusion and equal access for all. We had an interesting experience last weekend, and I don't know how many of you frequent our different amusement parks around the country. My daughter is 11 and really wanted to go to an amusement park. And so she had some days off school, so I took some days off work, and we went to Dallas, Fort Worth, and visited Six Flags in Arlington. Well, she had knee surgery recently, and so I brought my son's wheelchair. Don't be alarmed. He doesn't use it except for when we're out in the community, so he didn't need it for the time that we were gone. But I brought my son's wheelchair for her just because I knew she would fatigue. She's walking around and she's fine, but I wanted her to be able to be there all day and not fatigue and then have to leave because she just couldn't walk anymore. So we brought the wheelchair. We were going up to a ride. It was a rainy day, and so the park was nowhere near capacity. It was pretty low attendance day. We went up to this ride. There wasn't anybody in line for the ride, but there was a ramp. It was up steps to get to it, and I knew she just doesn't do well with steps. And so she was in the wheelchair, and I rolled around to what said it was the ADA accessible entrance. And the young man, these places are basically run by 16-year-olds, and it's their first job, and they're not informed of the accessibility that these rides are supposed to have. And so I strolled her around to the young man who was standing at what was actually the exit of the ride, but that was the way you had to get there if you used a wheelchair. And I rolled her around, and here we are. And I said, we need to come in, but she can't do the steps. And he said, do you have the fast pass? Do you have the ADA pass? And I said, no. They gave me the paper about it when we came into the park. And basically, it was for a permanent disability. It did not include a temporary disability like a broken leg or, in her case, knee surgery, where you just can't do the stairs for a short period of time. So the information that they gave me was for a permanent disability, and you had to provide pretty intense documentation like an IEP or physician's letter, those kinds of things, which we didn't have. And so I just threw the paper away. I couldn't use it. And he let us in only because there wasn't a line. But I told my daughter as we were rolling, I was rolling her away from the ride after, and I said, you know what? He had to provide us accessibility to the ride. And I don't think he knew that, but just because we didn't have that paper didn't mean we didn't have access to the ride. We weren't asking to go to the head of the line. We were asking to access the public ride. And so I would have definitely had a case. Had he given us any more flack about it, I would have had to whip out the mama bear, voice. And which I don't normally have to do for her because she's not my child with a disability. So, it was a little bit different. Wearing that hat with her was a little odd, but they have to provide access for you, even if you have a temporary disability. So if you're just in a wheelchair because of an injury and it's short term, or if you're on crutches or for whatever reason you can't traverse steps and there is a ramp in another place, you have to have access to that. Even if it's not a permanent disability. Just a little thing that we had recently. But my daughter's learning all about these things, and she's learning about being stared at and how different it feels for people to perceive that you have a disability. It has really been on her mind since she had to start wearing a brace and these kinds of things with her knee injury. So interesting, very, very interesting perspective. These resources are for you. I told you that I put the Jump Start information, which is Louisiana's CTE program. There's quite a bit of information here. Also, the Independent Futures That Work link is really good for it has a lot of like checklists and things that you can work through with a student, with your child, or with a student, a family that you work with if you're a professional. Our website also, we have a lot of employment resources. We have resources about the different programs, the college programs in Louisiana that have intellectual, programs for people with intellectual or developmental disabilities specifically, and also just other information about access for students who may have a 504 plan, who may need some accommodations in college and things that they can do to advocate for themselves to get what they need in college, because IDEA only goes through high school. So after that, you're dependent on the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. If you need to contact us, by all means, please get in touch. There's all kinds of ways that you can get to us. Check out our website. Make sure that you have looked at all the different training opportunities that we provide every month. Would love to see you on these very often. I have just dropped the link to the little evaluation survey in the chat box. Please click on that as I take questions, and would love to hear your questions. If you need a certificate of attendance for today, click on that link and complete the evaluation. That's how you request that. I have to keep all that information in one place so that I can do those certificates at the end of the week for this week. My contact information is on the slides as well. If you have something that comes up later and you need to talk to somebody, please reach out to me. If I can't help you, I will certainly pass you along to someone who can. Okay, so for today, what are your questions? I can open your mic. If you have a question you want to talk out loud, raise your hand and I'll open your mic. And I see that I'm getting some email addresses. I cannot send you a certificate with an email address in the chat. This chat goes away when I close up. So complete the evaluation on the link that I put in the chat box and put your information there, and I'll be happy to send you that later on in the week. What if we didn't receive a certificate from the last one? If it was requested, I should have sent that to you. I have had situations where people were huddled around one computer and they never registered and they weren't listed as being there and they requested certificates. I can't give you a certificate if you are not on a Zoom call with your name. So if I don't have any proof that you were there, in other words, I can't give you a certificate. So if you didn't get one and that was the situation, but if you were there, you did register and you requested a certificate, shoot me an email and let me check it out. I'll be happy to do it if I've got the information. Any questions? Let's see, I did have some information, questions that I don't think, Rebecca, I don't think I'm going to be able to answer this today. I have a question in the chat that was that was a private question. Absolutely, Tanya, email me. Like I said, I am not the real person to talk to about the different things related to education and employment for adults with disabilities. I provide the trainings, and I research those. But as far as working through situations with you, if it's something that I can't help you with, I'm going to make sure that someone gets in touch with you. So shoot me an email, and I'll certainly do what I can. Absolutely, be glad to do that. Any other questions? Anybody have a question and want to raise a hand and speak out loud? All right, folks. Well, after you have clicked on grabbed that little survey, you're free to go anytime. I did have you said you have another webinar tonight. Yes, I have another webinar tonight at 7 p.m. That's on IEPs and behaviors and discipline. It's sort of a frequently asked questions about those things. So we'll hit the highlights on that. So I hope to see you there. Okay. Thank you. I will look forward to hearing from you. How do I join it? You know what? Let me grab a link real quick. I'm going to stop sharing. And let me grab the link. And I'll drop that in the chat box for you. Just a second.